This is a Grant Les Paul copy, and I should have thrown this away, but I'm glad I didn't. So those eagle-eyed amongst you may have noticed that a few months ago, my Gibson Les Paul Classic suddenly became a Les Paul copy, and my Gretsch disappeared. Now this is because I sent my Gibson and my Gretsch, my only two guitars, in for a service and a general resetup, and without going into detail as to why, ended up taking a hell of a lot longer to come back than planned. And I needed an electric guitar, both for videos and also for my original music that I use for music licensing. Now I could have borrowed one maybe from a family member or a friend, but I didn't want to take a guitar away from someone who used it regularly. So I remembered my old Les Paul copy that I had from when I was a kid that I was pretty certain was still at my mum and dad's house. Enter the Grant. So this is a Grant guitar. It's clearly a Les Paul copy, and it was given to me as a Christmas present from my mum and dad at around the age of 12. Give or take. Now at the time I loved this guitar, a proper rock and roll guitar, black with ivory detail. It looked like a guitar that a proper rock star would use. So for a few years, I was dead proud of my electric guitar. That was until I was around 16 and joined a band and started to develop more of an interest in real music and also an awareness of the guitars real musicians played, namely what was written on the headstock. Playing in a band and starting to play at gigs, not only did I become aware that I was holding the wrong guitar, but it also sounded really thin. It didn't sound the way a Les Paul was supposed to sound. It sounded cheap. So it will come as no surprise that the minute I had some money in the form of a student overdraft, I went out and bought myself an Epiphone Les Paul. And to replace my cheap practice amp, I bought a Crate digital amp, which I don't think exists anymore. And then the minute I started to earn real money, at about the age of 21, I traded them both in for my Gibson Les Paul Classic and my Fender DeVille valve amp. I never physically threw the Grant away, but let's be honest, I may as well have. So I bring it back from my parents' loft, dust it down, throw on a fresh pack of strings, plug it into my amp, which is important to know isn't the cheap practice amp I had when I was 15, which this would have last been played on. Well, it didn't sound that bad. Not a Les Paul, but different in a kind of bluesy lo-fi way. Which led me to inspect things a little bit closer. Turns out these humbuckers are not humbuckers at all. I mean, obviously they're not real humbuckers, but they're not even humbucker copies. They're single coils disguised in humbucker shells. Now, Les Pauls are largely defined by the sound created from their humbucker pickups. Some do have P90s, but therefore Les Paul copies are also largely defined by the sound created from their humbucker clones. Can you even call it a Les Paul copy if it has single coil pickups? Then there's the body. The Gibson is constructed from a solid mahogany body straight through to the neck with a maple top. The Grant, I'll be honest, I've got no idea what it's made of, but most cheaper Les Paul copies are made of a wood called akumi. I've no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly. This one, the copy, has a bolt-on neck, as opposed to the Les Paul, which is all made from one piece of wood. The body on the Grant is noticeably thinner. I don't know whether you can see that on camera, but it also has a far less, it's down for a sec, a far less defined arch top. Now I don't know for definite, but I would also say the neck angle looks a lot less steep than that of the Gibson. So single coil, bolt-on neck, thinner, flatter body, less steep neck angle. I don't think we can actually compare this Les Paul copy to a real Les Paul, because it's not a Les Paul, is it? I think it might be closer to a Telecaster. So this led to some further investigation. Turns out Grant guitars were originally sold and distributed through Jimmy Grant's music stores in Glasgow and Edinburgh in Scotland between 1965 and 1985. During this period, Jimmy Grant imported Japanese-made guitars and badged them with the Grant logo. And it's generally accepted on guitar forums that these guitars came out of the Fujigen factory in Matsumoto, Japan. Now, this is the same factory that produces Ibanez guitars, Yamahas, some Japanese-made Epiphones and Gretsch's. They also manufacture guitars under their own branding, FGN, and they're clearly not marketed as entry-level guitars. Now, Fujigen may not be that well known in the consumer world, but in the guitar manufacturing world, for many decades, Fujigen have been regarded as one of the great guitar makers of Japan, with Japanese quality craftsmanship being a sought-after thing. So, that certainly inspires some confidence in the old Grant. Now, it's impossible to work out exactly when this was made. There's no serial number, at least not in any obvious place. And even if there were one, I probably wouldn't know what to do with it. But looking at very similar, in fact, identical models on YouTube and Reverb suggests that this model, with these particular stylistic detailing, the particular logo used, the ivory details, the type of bridge, puts this as a 1970s model. Which led me to my next question. Unfortunately, it looks like I'm not going to be sailing off into the sun anytime soon. But it does seem that these guitars are valued, at least for their rarity and intriguing backstory. I found Facebook pages dedicated to Grant owners and discussions, Reddit threads, guitar forum posts, and YouTube channels created specifically to talk about modding these things or trading them for other Grant models. There's clearly a cult following and an intriguing community of appreciators of these 50-year-old guitars. And I've got one, which is kind of cool. In a nerdy way. Is this a vintage guitar? Does that make me a vintage guitar owner? So thank you, Mum and Dad, for my Christmas present circa 1998, which I briefly loved as a teenager before all but physically threw away, only to have found a new love for once again. Who knows what the backstory is of this 50-year-old cheap Japanese-made Les Paul copy. But I guess it'd be interesting to see how the next 50 pan out. Oh, you are kidding me.